The Draconis wanted to murder the crippled alien girl, but the human would make sure she lived no matter the cost. Stephen Howard, a skilled human mechanic working on a remote space station, had seen a lot in his years servicing ships near Draconis territory. But nothing prepared him for the sight of the mangled reptilian body inside the damaged escape pod that docked with the station. He recognized the alien as Draconis, a species that had an uneasy truce with humanity after years of hostilities. Her name was Rigel, he learned, and she had been paralyzed from the waist down, escaping a rebel attack on her ship. When the station's Draconis medical staff refused to treat her, seeing her disability as making her life not worth saving, Stephen was filled with outrage and disgust. He decided then and there that he would do whatever it took to help Rigel survive and recover, even if it meant risking himself to save an alien his people called an enemy. As he worked tirelessly to cobble together adaptive devices to help her regain mobility, Stephen learned Rigel's tragic past. She had been a brilliant ship engineer, but in the oppressive Draconis caste system, her disability from a childhood accident made her an outcast, ridiculed and shunned. The rebel attack had targeted the disabled like her for extermination. Her escape pod was her last chance at survival. Stephen and Rigel grew close as he cared for her, finding a bond that transcended their race's differences and hostilities. But to both human and Draconis leadership, their relationship was a dangerous breach of boundaries that had to be stopped at any cost. As he looked deeper, Stephen discovered Rigel's pod carried more than a wounded passenger. Hidden in encrypted files were plans for a devastating new Draconis weapon that threatened to destroy the fragile peace and start a catastrophic war. Now, Stephen is in a desperate race against time to save not only the alien he has come to love, but the future for both their peoples. With Rigel's life hanging by a thread and the specter of interspecies war looming, he must find a way to unravel the truth and avert disaster, even if it means risking everything he holds dear. Stephen hunched over his workbench, sweat beading on his brow as he meticulously assembled a complex network of servos and sensors. This adaptive exoskeleton, tailored to Rigel's unique physiology, represented her best chance at regaining some semblance of mobility and independence. As he soldered the final connection, the encrypted files from Rigel's escape pod flashed across his mind, filling him with a growing sense of unease. He had stumbled upon the files while transferring data from the pod's damaged systems, hoping to find anything that might aid in Rigel's recovery. What he discovered instead were schematics for a monstrous Draconis superweapon capable of annihilating entire planets. Rigel had confirmed his worst fears, a rogue faction of Draconis hardliners, disgusted by what they saw as the dilution of their species through impurities like disability, planned to use this weapon to purge the galaxy of any they deemed unworthy, shattering the fragile peace with humanity in the process. Stephen knew he had to act fast. He called an emergency meeting with Rigel and Jack Briggs, the station's gruff but principled security chief. In the dimly lit maintenance bay, he laid out the terrifying implications of his discovery. "This isn't just about the Draconis anymore," Stephen said, his voice tight with barely contained urgency. "If these fanatics succeed, it could mean the end of everything we know." Jack nodded grimly. "We need to warn Earth Command, give them a chance to prepare." But when Stephen and Rigel tried to transmit a message, they found all off-station communications blocked. A chill ran down Stephen's spine. Something was very wrong here. Jack, his face etched with tenacity, vowed to get to the bottom of the mystery. Hours later, he returned, his expression even darker than before. "It's Admiral Cray," he said, his voice a harsh whisper. "He's been sabotaging the comms. I found evidence he's working with the Draconis rogues, trading station secrets for power and tech." Stephen felt his world tilt on its axis, bad enough to face hostile aliens, but to be betrayed by one of their own. The thought filled him with a cold, seething anger. As he and Rigel worked feverishly to gather more proof of the conspiracy, stealing moments to pore over intercepted transmissions and decoded files, Stephen felt a bond growing between them, a shared drive born of their commitment to peace and their experiences as outsiders in their own worlds. In Rigel's eyes, he saw a mirror of his own grit, a refusal to let hatred and fear consume the future. But their budding connection faced the ultimate test when a Draconis kill team, dispatched to silence Rigel and bury the evidence she carried, stormed Stephen's workshop in a hail of plasma fire. Jack burst into the room, his weapon blazing, buying precious seconds for Stephen and Rigel to flee. But a searing bolt caught the security chief in the chest, sending him crumpling to the floor. Stephen, his heart in his throat, hauled Rigel from her chair, supporting her weight as they stumbled through the smoke and chaos. Alarms blared and energy blasts scorched the walls around them. With the kill team in relentless pursuit and the conspirators alerted to their actions, they had no choice now but to run. As they raced through the station's labyrinthine corridors, Stephen's mind whirled with desperate plans. They had to find a way off this compromised outpost, had to deliver their evidence to those who could stop the Draconis plot. But with enemies on all sides and truths blurring into betrayal, their path forward had never seemed more perilous or uncertain. The stakes, Stephen realized with a grim clarity, were so much greater than just their own survival, or even the fate of their species. In their battered hands lay the fragile hope for peace in a galaxy balanced on the knife's edge of oblivion. Stephen's fingers flew across the shuttle's controls, his fists tight as he pushed the small craft to its limits. Plasma bolts from the Draconis kill team sizzled past, scorching the hull. Rigel clung to her seat, her scales pale with fear. "Hold on!" Stephen shouted as he executed a series of evasive maneuvers. The shuttle groaned under the strain, but slowly they pulled away from their pursuers. As they cleared the station's defensive perimeter, Stephen punched in the coordinates for the nearest human colony. "We made it," he breathed, shoulders sagging with relief. But their reprieve was short-lived. A warning klaxon blared through the cockpit as multiple systems began to fail. "The damage is worse than I thought," Stephen said, frantically trying to reroute power. "We're losing altitude fast." Rigel's eyes widened as she saw the barren, crater-pocked surface of a moon looming before them. "Can you land it?" Stephen gritted his teeth. "I can try." The shuttle plummeted through the thin atmosphere, shuddering violently. Stephen fought the controls, aiming for a relatively flat expanse of rock. They hit hard, skidding and bouncing across the lunar landscape before grinding to a halt. For long moments, they sat in stunned silence. Then Stephen turned to Rigel. "Are you okay?" She nodded, wincing. "A few new bruises, but I'll live. Thanks to you." Over the next days, Stephen threw himself into repairing the shuttle. The work was grueling, made harder by the moon's harsh conditions. Rigel's injuries and disability posed additional challenges, but Stephen was determined to keep her safe and comfortable. During breaks, huddled in the shuttle's cramped living space, they talked. Rigel spoke of her childhood on the Draconis homeworld, her passion for engineering, and the accident that left her paralyzed. Stephen shared stories of Earth, his dreams of exploring the stars, and his frustration with humanity's fear of the unknown. "I always hoped our peoples could find common ground," Rigel said softly one night, "that we could move past our differences and build something beautiful together." Stephen reached out, gently taking her clawed hand in his. "Maybe we still can." Their moment of connection was shattered by the sound of engines. Stephen peered out the viewport, his blood running cold at the sight of Draconis ships descending to the surface. "It's a base," he whispered. "We crash-landed on a secret Draconis base." They watched in tense silence as soldiers disembarked, speaking in the harsh clicks and hisses of the Draconis language. Stephen's eyes widened as he caught snippets of their conversation. "The weapon, test firing, purge the unworthy." He turned to Rigel, saw the same realization and commitment in her eyes. "We have to stop them," she said. "Agreed, but how?" Stephen's gaze fell on his toolkit, an idea forming. "I might be able to hack their systems, get us inside, but it's risky." Rigel nodded grimly. "We don't have a choice." Hours later, using salvaged parts and his own ingenuity, Stephen had cobbled together a device to interface with the Draconis security protocols. His hands shook as he input the final command. "It worked," he said, disbelieving. "We're in the system. I can create false IDs, requisition uniforms." Rigel's eyes glimmered with a mix of pride and trepidation. Then let's go defend the galaxy. Disguised in ill-fitting Draconis armor, they made their way into the heart of the base. Stephen's heart raced as they passed squads of soldiers and technicians, certain they would be discovered at any moment. But his false credentials held, and soon they were exploring restricted areas, gathering intel on the superweapon project. Their breakthrough came unexpectedly. A high-ranking officer approached Rigel, intrigued by her obvious engineering expertise despite her disability. "You," he barked, "what's your specialty?" Rigel straightened, her voice steady. "Weapon systems integration, sir." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Good. Report to Lab 7. We need fresh eyes on a special project." As Rigel was led away, she shot Stephen a meaningful look. This was their chance to learn the truth about the superweapon. But the fear in Stephen's gut told him they were walking a knife's edge, and one wrong move could spell disaster for them both. Stephen's fingers flew across the keypad, inputting the final sequence of his forged access codes. He held his breath as the security panel blinked, then flashed green. The reinforced door slid open with a soft hiss. "We're in," he whispered to Rigel, who gripped the arms of her makeshift wheelchair tightly. They crept through the stark corridors, hearts pounding. The restricted labs loomed ahead, a fortress of gleaming metal and pulsing energy fields. As they rounded the final corner, both froze in awe and horror. Before them stood a colossal machine, easily the size of a small starship. At its core, contained within shimmering force fields, writhed a tiny point of absolute darkness, an artificial singularity. "By the stars," Rigel breathed, her scales paling. "It's worse than we imagined." Stephen scanned the control interfaces, mind racing. "If I can overload the containment field..." A harsh voice cut through the air. "Step away from the controls, intruders!" They spun to face the Draconis officer who'd shown interest in Rigel earlier. His plasma rifle hummed ominously. "You don't understand what you're doing," Rigel pleaded. "This weapon will destroy everything." The officer's eyes narrowed. "It will cleanse our empire of weakness, of impurities like you." He sneered at Rigel's paralyzed legs. Stephen lunged for the controls. The officer fired. Rigel screamed. The blast went wide, striking the Singularity's containment field. Alarms blared as the weapon's core destabilized. "Run!" Stephen yelled, grabbing Rigel's chair and shoving it towards the exit. The facility shuddered around them as they fled deeper into its bowels. Rounding a corner, they collided with a group of Draconis. Stephen raised his fists, ready to fight, but Rigel held up a hand. "Wait, they're not soldiers." One of the Draconis, missing an arm, stepped forward. "We're dissidents. We've been working against the rogues from within. Come with us if you want to live." With no other choice, Stephen and Rigel followed as the base crumbled around them. They raced through collapsing corridors towards the central array. "We can broadcast the truth from there," the one-armed Draconis explained. They burst into the communications hub, only to find it already occupied. Admiral Cray stood there, flanked by the base's rogue Draconis leader. "Well, well," Cray drawled. "Looks like our little problem just solved itself." Stephen's mind raced. He pulled out a data chip, praying it had survived their ordeal. "Before you do anything, you need to see this." He slotted the chip into a nearby console. Footage flickered to life, showing the true extent of Cray's betrayal and the horrors the weapon would unleash on both their peoples. The rogue leader's eyes widened in shock. This cannot be." "It is," Stephen said firmly. "Your own people, innocent civilians, all would die for Cray's lust for power." The Draconis leader's claws clenched. With a roar, he turned on Cray. In the chaos that followed, Stephen, Rigel, and the dissidents overwhelmed the remaining loyalists. Rigel's claws flew across the communications array. "Uploading now, the whole galaxy will know the truth." As klaxons blared and the base shook itself apart, Stephen pulled Rigel close. Their eyes met, a universe of understanding passing between them. "We did it," he said softly. Rigel nodded, a fierce pride in her eyes. Together. The sound of approaching shuttles filled the air as their message reached both fleets. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The blaring of alarms jolted Stephen awake. He sat up, disoriented in the sterile confines of the colony's medical wing. Rigel lay on the adjacent bed, her scales pale under the harsh lighting. "What's happening?" she asked, voice tight with pain. Before Stephen could respond, the door burst open. A team of Draconi's warriors stormed in, their armor adorned with the twisted symbol of genetic purity. "Purifiers," Stephen hissed, leaping to his feet. The lead purifier pointed a clawed finger at Rigel. "Seize the abomination!" Stephen's body moved before his mind could catch up. He grabbed a nearby tray, hurling it at the first attacker. The metal connected with a satisfying crunch, dropping the purifier to the floor. Two more rushed him. Stephen ducked under a swinging fist, driving his elbow into one attacker's gut. He spun, catching the other with a palm strike to the throat that left the Draconis gasping. More purifiers poured into the room. Stephen fought with a savage intensity that surprised even himself. His strikes were precise, his reactions lightning fast. He moved with the fluid grace of a trained fighter, not a simple mechanic. "Stephen?" Rigel called out, fear and confusion in her voice. He had no time to explain. A purifier's energy blade sliced through the air, nearly taking off Stephen's head. He rolled, coming up with a handful of surgical instruments. The improvised weapons flew true, embedding themselves in vulnerable spots between armor plates. For a moment, Stephen thought they might win. Then a resonant boom shook the building. Smoke poured through the vents. In the confusion, a purifier slipped past Stephen's guard, seizing Rigel. "Enough!" The purifier leader stepped forward, pressing a blade to Rigel's throat. "Surrender, or the defective dies." Stephen froze, his hands clenching into fists. Colonial security forces burst into the room, weapons raised. "Let them go," a human officer shouted. The purifier leader sneered. "We leave with her, or no one leaves at all." "Stephen," Rigel pleaded, her eyes wide. "Don't let them take me." Stephen's mind raced. He could see a dozen ways to disarm the purifier, to save Rigel. But where had this knowledge come from? "Who are you, really?" the purifier leader asked, eyes narrowing. "No mere human moves like that." Fragments of memory flashed through Stephen's mind. Endless training, classified briefings, a life dedicated to bridging the gap between species. Stephen began, but was cut off by a chilling laugh from the purifier leader. "It doesn't matter," the Draconis hissed. "We have insurance." He pulled out a small device, its core pulsing with sickly energy. "Salvaged from your little adventure, enough radioactive material to poison this entire colony." Stephen's blood ran cold. He locked eyes with Rigel, seeing his own anguish reflected there. "You have 1 minute," the purifier said. "Save your pet monster or save these humans. Choose." Stephen's mind whirled. The colony or Rigel, thousands of lives or the woman he loved, the fate of human-Draconus relations hanging in the balance. Time was running out. Stephen had to decide. Stephen's heart raced as he stared at the purifier leader's sinister device. The sickly glow of radioactive material pulsed, a silent threat to thousands of innocent lives. His eyes darted between the sneering Draconis and Rigel's terrified face. "Tick-tock, human," the purifier hissed. "Your pet or your people?" Stephen's muscles tensed, ready to spring into action, but the risk was too great. He slowly raised his hands in surrender. "We'll go with you," he said, voice tight. "Just don't hurt anyone else." The purifiers wasted no time. They roughly grabbed Stephen and Rigel, shoving them towards the exit. As they were marched through the colony's corridors, Stephen caught glimpses of panicked faces. Alarms blared, urging evacuation. The purifier ship loomed before them, a dark behemoth against the stars. Its hull bristled with weaponry. Stephen and Rigel were unceremoniously thrown into a cramped cell, the door slamming shut with finality. As the engines roared to life, Stephen pressed his face against a tiny viewport. The colony shrank away, along with any hope of rescue. He turned to Rigel, seeing his own fear reflected in her alien eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I couldn't let them hurt all those people." Rigel nodded, her scaled hand finding his. "You did the right thing." Hours passed in tense silence. The cell's oppressive atmosphere weighed on them both. Finally, the door slid open. The Purifier leader stood there, flanked by guards. "Come," he ordered. "It's time you understood the glorious purpose you'll serve." They were led to a cavernous command center. Holographic displays filled the air, depicting star systems and military installations. The Purifier gestured grandly. "Behold the instrument of our race's purification." Stephen's eyes widened as he took in the information before him. Schematics for a virus designed to infiltrate the most secure systems in Draconis space. His blood ran cold as he grasped the horrific implications. "You're going to turn their own defenses against them," he breathed. The Purifier's mandibles clicked in savage satisfaction. "The weak will burn, leaving only the pure to rebuild our empire." Rigel hissed in disgust. "You're insane. This is genocide." They were shoved back towards their cell. As the door closed, Stephen caught Rigel's eye. A silent understanding passed between them. They had to stop this at any expense. In the relative privacy of their prison, Stephen took a deep breath. It was time for the truth. "Rigel, there's something I need to tell you," he began. I'm not who you think I am." He explained his true nature, the genetic enhancements, the covert training. With each word, he expected to see revulsion in Rigel's eyes. Instead, he found only compassion and a glimmer of excitement. "I have a confession too," Rigel said softly. Her claws tapped a complex rhythm on the cell wall, deactivating hidden surveillance devices. "I come from a line of Draconis scientists, outcasts, because our work pushed the boundaries of what's considered acceptable." Stephen's mind raced with the possibilities. "With your knowledge and my abilities." Rigel nodded, a fierce grin spreading across her face. "We might just have a chance." They spent the next hours in furious planning, whispering strategies and contingencies. When the opportunity came, they'd be ready. The ship shuddered, dropping out of faster-than-light travel. Footsteps approached their cell. Stephen tensed, ready for action. But when the door opened, it wasn't a Purifier guard that stood there. Admiral Cray's smug face peered in at them. Well, what an unexpected pleasure." Stephen's fists clenched. "You're supposed to be dead." Cray chuckled. "Reports of my demise were greatly exaggerated. Now, shall we discuss the New World Order?" The Admiral's presence complicated everything. As Cray outlined his treacherous deal with the Purifiers, Stephen's enhanced mind whirled through scenarios. Their plan would need to change, and fast. Alarms blared throughout the ship. They were approaching their target, the heart of Draconis military command. It was now or never. Stephen exploded into action, his augmented muscles propelling him forward with inhuman speed. He slammed into the nearest guard, using the Draconis' own weapon to clear a path. Rigel moved with surprising agility despite her disability, her claws flying across control panels. They fought their way through the ship's corridors, Stephen's combat training allowing him to anticipate and counter every attack. Rigel's technical skills proved invaluable, sealing bulkheads and wreaking havoc with ship systems. The computer core loomed before them, a fortress of circuitry and data. Stephen stood guard as Rigel's claws danced across the interface, weaving a digital counterattack to the Purifier's virus. A plasma bolt sizzled past Stephen's ear. He spun to see Cray and a squad of Purifiers bearing down on them. "Keep working," Stephen shouted to Rigel. "I'll hold them off." The next minutes were a blur of violence. Stephen pushed his enhanced body to its limits, becoming a whirlwind of lethal precision. But the enemies kept coming, and he felt his strength beginning to falter. Behind him, Rigel cried out in triumph. "It's done! The counter-virus is—" Her words cut off in a choked gasp. Stephen turned to see a Purifier's energy blade protruding from Rigel's chest. As the Draconis he loved crumpled to the ground, something snapped inside Stephen. With a primal roar, he gave himself fully to the combat programming buried in his genes. The world narrowed to a series of targets to be eliminated. When he came back to himself, the deck was littered with broken bodies. Stephen fell to his knees beside Rigel, cradling her dying form. Tears streamed down his face as he felt her life slipping away. A movement caught his eye. Cray, somehow still alive, was crawling towards a control panel. The Admiral's bloody fingers reached for the AI system's access codes. Stephen found himself torn between two impossible choices. He could try to save Rigel, the woman he loved more than life itself. Or he could stop Cray and secure the future of both their races. Time seemed to stand still as Stephen's heart raced as he cradled Rigel's limp form. Her scales felt cold beneath his fingers, blood seeping from the energy blade wound. He glanced at Cray, who was inching towards the AI core's control panel. Time slowed. Stephen's enhanced mind calculated trajectories, analyzing every possible outcome. He couldn't lose Rigel, but he couldn't let Cray unleash genocidal chaos either. With a burst of augmented speed, Stephen lunged at Cray. His fist connected with the Admiral's jaw, sending him sprawling. In fluid motions, Stephen disabled the remaining purifiers. Bones cracked under his strikes. Bodies hit the floor. He seized Cray by the throat, dragging him to the AI interface. "Input your override codes now!" Cray sneered. "Or what?" Stephen's grip tightened. "Or I'll pry them from your dying mind." Fear flashed in Cray's eyes. His claws danced across the console, entering complex sequences. "Initiating lockdown protocols," the AI intoned. "Virus quarantined. Firewalls engaged." Stephen slammed Cray's head against the panel, knocking him unconscious. Crisis averted, he raced back to Rigel. Her breathing was shallow, barely perceptible. Stephen's hands flew over nearby equipment, cobbling together a crude stasis pod. He tapped into forgotten technical knowledge, praying it would be enough. "Hold on," he whispered, lowering Rigel into the humming chamber. Energy fields stabilized her fading life signs. Stephen activated the ship's distress beacon. Within minutes, Allied vessels swarmed the area. He sagged against the stasis pod as soldiers secured the bridge. Days blurred together. Stephen found himself in sterile briefing rooms, facing stern-faced officials from both species. They grilled him relentlessly about his enhanced abilities and covert past. "How long have you been operating as a sleeper agent?" a human admiral demanded. Stephen's mind focused. "I'm no one's agent. I did what was necessary to save lives." Eventually, the interrogations gave way to cautious praise. Stephen leveraged every ounce of his new influence, calling in favors and making backroom deals. "Rigel's stasis pod needs to be transferred to the Draconis homeworld," he insisted. "It's her only chance." After endless bureaucratic wrangling, Stephen stood before the Draconis philosophical conclave. Ancient, scaled faces regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "This outcast," Stephen began, gesturing to Rigel's pod, "embodies the best of both our species. Her insights could bridge divides we've barely begun to cross." The conclave deliberated for hours. Finally, the eldest member nodded. "We will oversee her care personally." Stephen watched as Rigel was wheeled into a state-of-the-art medical bay. Draconis scientists swarmed around her, already debating treatment options. A gruff military officer approached Stephen. "We need you in the field. Purifier cells are still active in the outer colonies." Stephen's fists clenched. He looked at Rigel one last time, then nodded. "I'm ready." The next cycles passed in a blur of covert missions and brutal firefights. Stephen's enhanced body moved with lethal grace, dismantling purifier strongholds across the galaxy. Each victory felt hollow without Rigel by his side. Between missions, he pored over medical reports from the Draconis homeworld. The doctors spoke of experimental therapies and promising breakthroughs. Stephen clung to each scrap of hope, even as the long cycles of separation weighed on his soul. Stephen's enhanced muscles burned as he sprinted through the corridors of yet another purifier stronghold. Plasma bolts sizzled past his head, leaving scorch marks on the metal walls. He dove, rolled, and came up firing. Two extremists dropped, their scaled bodies smoking. "Clear!" he shouted, securing the room. As his team swept the facility, Stephen's mind drifted. Rigel's face floated before him, her scales shimmering in the stasis pod's glow. He shook his head, forcing himself to focus on the mission. Cycles passed in a blur of violence and covert operations. Stephen became a legend among both human and Draconis forces, his augmented abilities turning the tide against the remaining purifier cells. But each victory felt hollow without Rigel by his side. Then, as he sat cleaning his weapons after a particularly grueling raid, his comm unit chimed. The message was terse. Subject stable. Regenerative therapy approved. Return immediately. Stephen's heart raced as he boarded the fastest transport to the Draconis homeworld. The medical facility loomed before him, a towering spire of gleaming alloys and pulsing energy fields. Inside, he found Rigel's stasis chamber surrounded by a team of conclave physicians. "We're ready to begin," the lead scientist said, mandibles clicking with excitement. Stephen watched, barely breathing, as they initiated the revival process. Nanobots swarmed through Rigel's body, repairing damage at the cellular level. Streams of data flowed across holographic displays, tracking every minute change. Days stretched into weeks. Stephen barely slept, poring over medical texts and pestering the physicians with questions. His enhanced mind absorbed complex genetic theories, searching for any way to help. "Her DNA is unique," one scientist muttered, peering at a holographic model. "The regenerative process keeps hitting roadblocks." Stephen's fists clenched. "Then we find a way around them. Keep trying." Finally, after a full solar cycle of agonizing work, Rigel's eyes fluttered open. Stephen leaned close, his heart pounding. "Hey there," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Rigel's pupils dilated as she focused on his face. Her voice was weak, barely audible. "Saint Stephen?" He nodded, fighting back tears. "I'm here, you're safe." The next months were a grueling test of patience and persistence. Stephen watched as Rigel struggled to relearn basic motor functions, her newly regenerated nervous system misfiring and faltering. "I can't," Rigel hissed in frustration, her leg trembling as she tried to take a step. Stephen steadied her, his touch gentle despite his immense strength. "You can. One more try." Slowly, painstakingly, Rigel regained her mobility. Her mind, too, sharpened. Stephen marveled as she engaged the Draconis scientists in complex debates about genetic theory and nanotechnology. "Your insights are unprecedented," one physician admitted, mandibles twitching in what Stephen had learned was a sign of respect. Rigel's scales flushed with pride. "My ancestors' work wasn't all madness. There's value in pushing boundaries." As Rigel's strength returned, she and Stephen found a new rhythm to their lives. They spent their days in the research labs, pushing the boundaries of cross-species medicine. Nights were filled with quiet conversation and shared dreams of a peaceful future. But peace, it seemed, was not to last. The comm unit in their quarters chimed, displaying an urgent message from both human and Draconis high commands. Stephen's fists tight as he read the report. Purifier remnants clashing with hardline Draconis factions, accusations flying, the fragile peace threatening to shatter. Rigel placed a clawed hand on his shoulder. "They need us, don't they?" Stephen nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him once more. "Looks like our expertise is required. Are you up for this?" Rigel's eyes gleamed with a fierce perseverance. "Always. Let's go make a difference." As they packed for the journey ahead, Stephen couldn't shake a sense of unease. They had fought so hard for this peace. What new challenges awaited them beyond the stars? Stephen and Rigel boarded a sleek diplomatic shuttle, leaving behind the sterile halls of the Draconis medical facility. As they accelerated towards the neutral meeting grounds, Rigel's claws tapped a nervous rhythm on the armrest. "We've come so far," she murmured, her scales shifting hues with anxiety. What if it's not enough? Stephen placed his hand over hers, feeling the familiar texture of her scaled skin. We'll make it work. We have to. The neutral station loomed before them, a massive construct of interlocking habitation rings. As they docked, Stephen's enhanced senses picked up the undercurrent of tension thrumming through the air. Inside the cavernous meeting chamber, representatives from both factions glared at each other across the table. Purifier hardliners, their scales a stark white, sat rigidly opposed to the more colorful Draconis loyalists. "This is a farce," snarled a Purifier elder, thumping his hand on the table. "You'd have us abandon our sacred cause." Rigel stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Your cause nearly destroyed both our peoples, but it stemmed from real pain, real fear. We're here to address those root issues, not ignore them." As she spoke, Stephen scanned the room, his augmented vision picking up subtle tells. A Purifier aide's hand strayed toward a concealed pocket. With lightning reflexes, Stephen crossed the room and seized the man's wrist. "Nice try," he growled, extracting a compact data drive. "Planting false evidence won't help your case." Days blurred into weeks as negotiations ground on. Rigel worked tirelessly, her insights cutting through layers of rhetoric to expose the shared traumas underlying the conflict. Stephen prowled the station's corridors, thwarting sabotage attempts and tracking down disinformation sources. Finally, after a grueling final session, an accord was reached. Stephen watched as Purifier and Draconis representatives signed the agreement with trembling hands. "A new beginning," Rigel whispered, her eyes shining. The work, however, had only begun. Stephen and Rigel found themselves overseeing the mass relocation of Purifier populations to their new colony world. They stood in the control center of a massive transport ship, watching as families boarded with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Remember," Stephen instructed a mixed team of human and Draconis medical staff, "these people have unique needs. Respect their beliefs, even if you disagree." As the colony took shape, Stephen felt a growing sense of accomplishment. But that feeling shattered when the first reports of illness came in. "Unknown pathogen," a frantic doctor reported via hologram. "Highly virulent. We've already lost 3 patients." Stephen's enhanced mind raced through options. "I'm going in," he declared, suiting up in a sealed hazard suit. "Stephen, no!" Rigel protested. "The risk—" He silenced her with a kiss. "Someone has to. I'm best equipped to handle it." The quarantine zone was chaos. Stephen moved swiftly, collecting samples and comforting the sick. His suit's sensors registered multiple breaches, but he pushed on. Back in the lab, Rigel worked with manic intensity. "We've isolated the virus," she reported, "but creating a vaccine—" Stephen, already feeling feverish, nodded grimly. "Whatever it takes." Days later, armed with the newly synthesized vaccine, Stephen led teams through the infected areas. His augmented body fought the virus even as he administered life-saving injections. The crisis passed, but at a terrible cost. Stephen collapsed, his enhanced physiology finally overwhelmed. Rigel hovered over him, monitoring failing vital signs. "There's one option left," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But Stephen, it could change you forever." Through the haze of delirium, Stephen managed to focus on her face. "I trust you," he rasped. "Always." Rigel's claws shook as she prepared the experimental gene therapy. She leaned close, whispering, "Come back to me, my love." With a silent prayer, she activated the treatment, watching as it coursed through Stephen's veins, rewriting the very essence of what made him unique. The gene therapy coursed through Stephen's veins, a violent tempest of genetic restructuring. His body convulsed, muscles spasming as the treatment waged war against the deadly virus. Rigel watched, her scaled hands pressed against the containment chamber's transparent surface. "Fight it, Stephen," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of medical equipment. Alarms blared as Stephen's vitals plummeted. His eyes rolled back, foam flecking his lips as seizures racked his frame. Rigel's claws flew across the control panel, initiating emergency protocols. We're losing him, a human doctor shouted. Rigel snarled, baring her teeth. No, we're not. She keyed in the command for stasis induction, watching as cryogenic mist enveloped Stephen's thrashing form. Days bled into weeks. Rigel barely left the medical bay, her scales dulling from lack of proper care. She pored over genetic readouts, tweaking the therapy's parameters with trembling claws. You need rest, a junior physician insisted. Rigel's eyes, bloodshot from strain, fixed on the young Draconis. I'll rest when he wakes up. On the 23rd day, a breakthrough. Stephen's viral load began to drop, necrotic tissue giving way to healthy cell growth. Rigel allowed herself a moment of hope, pressing her forehead against the chamber's cool surface. Come back to me, she murmured. Finally, after weeks of agonizing anticipation, Stephen's eyes fluttered open. Rigel leaned in, her heart pounding. Stephen? She breathed. His gaze met hers, unfocused and confused. No spark of recognition lit his features. Who are you? He croaked, voice raw from disuse. Rigel's world shattered. She explained again and again, recounting their shared history. With each attempt, Stephen grew more agitated, withdrawing into himself. I don't know you, he insisted, curling away from her touch. I don't know any of this. Rigel watched, helpless, as human physicians escorted Stephen to a waiting shuttle. He didn't look back as the doors closed, severing their connection. Months passed. Rigel threw herself into her work, burying her pain beneath endless shifts in the medical ward. She saved lives, patched wounds, but the ache in her chest never faded. One night, as she stared out at the glittering expanse of space from her quarters, a message pinged on her comm unit. A brief update on Stephen's progress, living quietly on a human colony world, tending a small garden, content in his ignorance of the past. Rigel's claws tightened around the device. She wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all. Instead, she took a deep breath, allowing a bittersweet sense of acceptance to wash over her. Be well, my love, she whispered to the stars, knowing that somewhere out there, a part of her lived on in a man who no longer knew her name.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.